Today, President Obama will be addressing a White House summit on countering violent extremism. The discussion will focus on ways of preventing the radicalization and recruiting of those who might be drawn to terrorist violence. The president plans to stress to attendees that communities worldwide can be pivotal in dampening the threat of terrorism across the globe. In a Los Angeles Times op-ed, President Obama said, quote, "Groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL exploit the anger that festers when people feel that injustice and corruption is there, and quote, it is our free societies and diverse communities that offer the true path to opportunity, justice, and dignity." CBS Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues and senior national security analyst Juan Zarate have more on the White House summit on violent extremism in this edition of Flashpoints.
Let's talk about this White House summit. It's a 3-day summit hosted by the White House. What do you think they're trying to accomplish?
Well, a few things, Jeff. The White House clearly sees that the ideological underpinnings of terrorism for ISIS, for Al-Qaeda, remains a major problem. With attacks in Sydney, Paris, Denmark, there is a clear recognition, both in the U.S. and around the world, that we're not winning when it comes to dealing with the ideology, the narrative that is radicalizing individuals. And so this White House summit is an attempt to bring attention to that issue, to try to not only recognize what's already happening, the attempts to counter the narrative, the attempts to intervene, to deal with the radicalization, but also a way of bringing attention, funding, perhaps even new ideas to the table. And so this is why the White House is hosting events today. The State Department will host international events tomorrow. And there's really an attempt to galvanize both strategy and programs as a way of dealing with the ideology. This is something that's bedeviled the Bush administration and now is bedeviling the Obama administration.
Yeah, and we've seen that some of ISIS's gains has been in social media use. There is a lot of focus on that as well at this summit.
Absolutely, and there's a real sense, and this was a sense in the Bush administration as well, but clearly that these terrorists, which are medieval in their barbarity, are ultra-modern in their recruitment and radicalization. They've got slick media profiles. They have monthly editions of their reports. They come out with Twitter feeds and social media to attract attention, to recruit peer-to-peer. And so there's a sense that we're losing the battle in the modern media age to these medieval terrorist groups. And that's leading to recruitment from around the world. Thousands of foreign fighters that are now flowing into Iraq and Syria and elsewhere to fight under the banner of the Islamic State.
Well, and how does the White House and its allies in Europe counter that social media message from ISIS?
Well, I think you do it at multiple levels. It's not easy, of course. The governments have had a heck of a time doing this, in part because some of the messaging revolves around the theology of Islam. The reality is that this group, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, its predecessor, have really drawn from the theology and mythology of Islam. And the U.S. government isn't expert in that, isn't a credible voice, and so it's difficult. So what that means is you have to find credible voices in Muslim communities around the world, credible voices among ex-jihadis, among women and mothers of extremists. And there are those that are then able to, not because they're the government, but because they're credible voices, then be able to counter the narrative. And I think the role of government is to empower, enable, network, and perhaps even fund some of those efforts. And you've seen that in Europe and in the U.S. over the course of the last few years. And that's going to be part of the discussion in this summit.
But do you really expect something concrete to come from this summit?
Well, I mean, it's a fair question. There's a
lot of it is show, public relations, right?
Yeah, a lot of it is the White House demonstrating that they're not absent from this issue, because I think the Obama administration can come under a great deal of criticism in that they were absent on this issue for some time. They came into power wanting to constrain the sense of what this war was about. They talked about the war on Al-Qaeda. They didn't want to talk about a war on an ideology. The reality, though, is that this is a metastasized movement. The ideology is the connective tissue to a lot of these attacks and these groups. And so the White House has to demonstrate that it's doing something. A lot of this will be repackaging of what's already been done. Some of this, hopefully, will be new funding, new ideas. But you're right to be skeptical, because we have not been very successful to date in seeing the U.S. government really take on the ideology aggressively. I think a lot of this is learning from other countries, other partners who've done some good work, and to see if we can amplify that. That's, I think, the best we can hope for coming out of this summit.
All right, so we'll see what comes out of the summit. Juan Zarate, I'm Jeff Pegues, and that's Flashpoints.